Sometimes, people we least expect can bring the greatest changes in our lives, if only we give them a chance. Asterisk, he believed love wasn't meant for him until, she whispered, "Can I be your date tonight?" The dance of broken hearts, the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel sparkled under thousands of crystal lights. Golden silk drapes cascaded from the ceiling, while elegant couples moved gracefully across the polished marble floor. The annual Architecture Foundation Gala drew the city's elite, all dressed in their finest evening wear. Champagne glasses clinked as laughter filled the air, creating a symphony of celebration and success. In the corner of the room, James Thornfield sat quietly in his sleek titanium wheelchair, watching the festivities from afar. At 32, he possessed the kind of rugged handsomeness that once turned heads at every gathering. Dark brown hair swept back from a strong jawline. Deep green eyes that had once sparkled with ambition now held a distant, guarded expression. His perfectly tailored black tuxedo couldn't hide the reality that had changed his life 3 years ago. When a construction accident left his legs paralyzed, James had built Thornfield Designs from nothing, creating architectural masterpieces that graced magazine covers and won international awards. He had been the golden boy of the industry, engaged to Victoria Sterling, a prominent socialite who graced charity boards and society pages. But after the accident, everything crumbled. Victoria left within months, claiming she couldn't handle the complications of his condition. Friends gradually stopped calling. Business partners found reasons to meet elsewhere. Tonight, he attended alone, as he had for every event since the accident. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, in a ballroom he had designed 5 years earlier, feeling like a stranger in his own creation. The soaring arches and dramatic lighting that had once filled him with pride now seemed to mock his isolation. He sipped his untouched champagne. Watching couples glide across the dance floor he had carefully positioned to catch the evening light. Across the room, Emma Rodriguez moved efficiently between tables, checking arrangements and coordinating with the catering staff. As the event coordinator for Sterling Events, she had orchestrated dozens of galas, but tonight felt different. Perhaps it was because she recognized the loneliness in the eyes of the man in the wheelchair, a loneliness that mirrored her own. At 29, Emma possessed a natural beauty that needed no enhancement. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her simple black dress showed off her graceful figure. But it was her warm brown eyes and genuine smile that truly set her apart. She had learned to navigate these high society events with professional grace. Though she never quite felt like she belonged among the wealthy elite, Emma knew about feeling out of place. 2 years ago, her ex-husband Richard had walked out on her and their son Tommy, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibilities of family life. Since then, she had worked 2 jobs to support herself and her 8-year-old boy, taking evening events like this to supplement her daytime teaching salary. Most nights, her neighbor watched Tommy while she worked. But tonight, he was at his grandmother's house. As Emma moved through the crowd, she noticed how guests gave the man in the wheelchair a wide berth. They would nod politely if they made eye contact, but no one approached his table. She had seen this behavior before, the way people treated those they perceived as different, with a mixture of pity and discomfort. It stirred something protective in her heart. The evening progressed with speeches and award presentations. James received recognition for his contributions to sustainable architecture, but even this honor felt hollow. He rolled forward to accept the crystal trophy, delivered a brief thank you speech, and returned to his isolated table. The applause felt more like polite obligation than genuine appreciation. Emma watched the entire exchange from her position near the kitchen doors. She saw how James's shoulders tensed when he spoke, how quickly he retreated afterward. Something in his demeanor reminded her of Tommy after Richard left. That same wounded pride mixed with desperate longing for connection. As the dancing resumed, Emma made a decision that surprised even herself. She had been directing events for years, but had never stepped out of her professional role. Tonight would be different. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and walked directly toward James's table. James looked up in surprise as the elegant woman approached. He braced himself for the usual uncomfortable small talk, or worse, the pitying smile that so many people offered. But Emma's expression held something different, something that made his pulse quicken unexpectedly. "Excuse me," Emma said, her voice clear and confident despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "I've been watching you all evening, and I have to ask." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Can I be your date tonight?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. James stared at her, certain he had misheard. In 3 years, no woman had approached him with anything resembling romantic interest. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Emma smiled at his shocked expression. "I know it's forward of me, but you look like you could use some company. And honestly, so could I. I'm Emma, by the way. Emma Rodriguez." "James," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. "James Thornfield. And you're either very kind or completely crazy. Probably a little of both." Emma laughed, the sound genuine and musical. "But life's too short to sit on the sidelines, don't you think?" James felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the armor he had built around his heart. "I don't dance anymore," he said quietly, gesturing toward his legs. "Who says dancing requires standing?" Emma extended her hand toward him. "Trust me." Against every instinct that told him to protect himself from disappointment, James took her hand. Her skin was warm and soft, and he felt a jolt of electricity at the contact. Emma's smile widened as she moved behind his wheelchair, placing her hands on the handles. "What are you doing?" James asked, suddenly aware that others were watching them. "Creating a new kind of dance," Emma replied, beginning to guide his chair in smooth, graceful movements across the edge of the dance floor. At first, James felt exposed and vulnerable, certain that people were staring out of pity or amusement. But Emma's confidence was infectious. She moved with such natural grace, turning his wheelchair in flowing circles and figure eights that somehow felt like dancing. Her movements were deliberate and beautiful, transforming what could have been awkward into something almost magical. "You're insane," James said. But he was smiling for the first time in months. Maybe Emma agreed, spinning his chair gently. "But look around." James followed her gaze and was surprised. See that other guests weren't staring with pity or discomfort. Some were smiling appreciatively. Others had stopped their own dancing to watch with genuine interest. A few couples had even begun to applaud as they moved together. Emma began to talk, her voice low enough that only James could hear. "I saw you earlier during your speech. You design beautiful buildings, don't you?" "I used to," James replied. "Now I mostly consult from behind a desk." "That's a shame," Emma said, guiding him in a wide, graceful arc. "The world needs more beauty, not less." Something in her tone made James look at her more carefully. "What about you?" "Are you a guest here, or I coordinate events like this?" Emma admitted. "I'm technically working right now, which makes this completely unprofessional of me." "Then why?" James asked, genuinely curious. Emma slowed their movement, coming around to face him directly. "Because sometimes you see someone who needs to remember they're not invisible. And you realize you need to remember the same thing." The honesty in her words hit James like a physical blow. For 3 years he had felt exactly that, invisible, forgotten, left behind by a world that had moved on without him. But Emma saw him, really saw him, not as a tragedy or an inspiration, but as a man. Their impromptu dance continued for several more minutes, and James found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't since the accident. Emma's presence was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. She talked easily about her work, her love of organizing events, and her hope to eventually start her own business. She mentioned her son Tommy briefly, describing him as the light of my life and my greatest adventure. When the music finally ended, scattered applause broke out across the ballroom. Emma took a theatrical bow, making James chuckle despite his embarrassment. As they moved away from the dance floor, James felt a strange reluctance to let the evening end. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I can't remember the last time I enjoyed myself at one of these things." "Thank you for trusting me," Emma replied, "and for reminding me that sometimes the best moments happen when we stop playing it safe." Hay found a quiet corner where Emma could take a brief break from her duties. James found himself opening up in ways that surprised him, telling her about his architectural work, his love of design, and even touching briefly on how his life had changed after the accident. Emma listened without the mixture of pity and discomfort he had grown to expect. She asked thoughtful questions about his buildings, showing genuine interest in his creative process. "I'd love to see some of your work sometime," Emma said. "I mean, beyond this beautiful ballroom." James felt his heart skip. "You would—" "Of course," Emma smiled. "I have a feeling you create spaces that make people feel welcome, included. The world needs more of that." Before James could respond, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from the catering manager. She sighed reluctantly. "I have to get back to work." "The evening's not over for me yet, of course," James said, trying to hide his disappointment. Emma stood, smoothing her dress, but then impulsively leaned down and placed her hand gently on his arm. "James, I meant what I said earlier. About seeing your work. And about tonight, I'm glad I asked." "So am I," James admitted, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. Emma started to leave, then turned back. "Would you like to have coffee sometime? When we're both free from our professional obligations?" James stared at her, hardly believing what he was hearing. "You're serious?" "Completely," Emma said. "I think you might be surprised by how much we have in common." "Yes," James said quickly, before he could lose his courage. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Emma's smile could have lit up the entire ballroom. She pulled out her phone, and they exchanged numbers, their fingers brushing briefly as she handed it back to him. "I'll call you tomorrow," she promised. As Emma walked away to resume her duties, James sat in stunned silence. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something he had thought was lost forever: hope. Not just for romance, though Emma's bold approach had awakened feelings he thought were buried, but hope for connection, for being seen and valued as a whole person. He watched Emma move efficiently through the crowd. Noting how she treated everyone with the same warmth and respect she had shown him, staff members smiled when they saw her coming, guests responded positively to her guidance, and she seemed to bring out the best in everyone around her. James realized that her kindness toward him hadn't been pity or charity. It was simply who she was. The evening wound down around him, but James felt more alive than he had in years. Tomorrow, Emma would call. Tomorrow, he might discover that love wasn't beyond his reach after all. Tonight had taught him that sometimes the most beautiful moments came from the most unexpected places, and that courage, both his and hers, could create magic even in the midst of loneliness. As he finally prepared to leave, James took one last look around the ballroom he had designed. For the first time since his accident, he saw it not as a monument to what he had lost, but as proof of what he could still create. And maybe, just maybe, Emma would help him remember how to build something beautiful again, not just in architecture, but in life itself. Building dreams together, 3 weeks had passed since the charity gala, and James found himself looking forward to Emma's calls with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified him. Their coffee date had turned into dinner, which led to a weekend visit to his architectural firm, and now they spoke nearly every day. For the first time since his accident, James felt genuinely excited about the future. Emma had been like a breath of fresh air in his carefully controlled world. She approached his disability with a matter-of-fact acceptance that was both refreshing and healing. When they went out together, she never fussed over accessibility or spoke to waiters on his behalf. She simply enjoyed his company, laughed at his jokes, challenged his ideas about everything from building design to the best pizza toppings. This Saturday morning, James was particularly nervous. Emma had invited him to her apartment for lunch, and he would finally meet Tommy, her 8-year-old son. James had been around children since his accident, but this felt different. This mattered in a way that made his palms sweat and his heart race. Emma's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house in the Arts District. James had called ahead to make sure there was elevator access, though Emma had assured him she had chosen the building specifically because it was fully accessible. As he rode the elevator up, he wondered if she had done that for him, or if it was simply coincidence. Emma opened the door wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, more relaxed than she did at the formal events where they had met. "Right on time," she said, smiling as she stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small but warm, filled with books, artwork, and the comfortable clutter of real life. James immediately noticed that Emma had rearranged her furniture to create clear pathways for his wheelchair. The gesture touched him more than he could express. "Tommy's in his room building something elaborate with Legos," Emma said, hanging up James's jacket. "He's been talking about meeting you all week. I think he's more nervous than excited." "That makes two of us," James admitted. Before Emma could respond, a small boy appeared in the hallway. Peeking around the corner with curious brown eyes that were clearly inherited from his mother, Tommy was small for 8, with Emma's dark hair and an expression of serious concentration that reminded James of himself at that age. "Tommy, come say hello," Emma encouraged gently. The boy approached slowly, studying James with a direct, unfiltered gaze that only children possessed. James had learned that kids often had the most honest reactions to his wheelchair. They were curious rather than pitying, direct rather than uncomfortable. "Are those your wheels?" Tommy asked, pointing at James's chair. "They are," James replied. "Pretty cool, right? They're made of titanium, which is super strong and light." Tommy's eyes widened with interest. "Like in robots?" "Exactly like in robots," James grinned. "Want to see how fast they can go?" For the next few minutes, Tommy peppered James with questions about the wheelchair's mechanics, its speed capabilities, and whether it could do wheelies. James answered each question seriously, occasionally demonstrating the chair's features. Emma watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart swelling as she saw her son's initial wariness transform into genuine fascination. "Can I try it?" Tommy asked eventually. James looked to Emma, who nodded her approval. "Just for a minute," she said. James transferred to the couch, a move he had practiced countless times, but which still required concentration and effort. Tommy climbed into the chair with wide eyes, gripping the push rims tentatively. "It's heavier than I thought," Tommy said, struggling to make the wheels turn. "It takes practice," James explained, "and strong arms. You have to use your whole body, not just your hands." They spent the next half hour with Tommy learning the basics of wheelchair navigation, while James offered tips and encouragement. Emma prepared lunch in the kitchen, stealing glances at the two most important people in her world as they bonded over wheels and engineering. During lunch, Tommy dominated the conversation with questions about James's work. "Do you build houses for people in wheelchairs?" he asked, fork loaded with macaroni and cheese. "Sometimes," James replied, "but I try to design buildings that work for everyone. Places where people like me can go easily, but that are also beautiful and interesting for everyone else." "That's smart," Tommy said seriously. "My friend Jake's grandpa uses a walker, and he can't come to some places because there are too many steps." James felt a familiar pang at the reminder of how the world often excluded people with mobility challenges. But Tommy's matter-of-fact acceptance of the issue, his immediate understanding of the problem, gave James hope for the next generation. After lunch, Tommy showed James his elaborate Lego city, complete with ramps and wide doorways that he had unconsciously designed for accessibility. "I want to be an architect like you when I grow up," Tommy announced. James's throat tightened with emotion. "That's a great goal, buddy. Maybe I could teach you some things about building design." "Really?" Tommy's face lit up. "Could you show me how to draw building plans?" "If your mom says it's okay," James looked at Emma, who was smiling softly at the exchange. "I think that would be wonderful," Emma said. As the afternoon wore on, James felt himself relaxing completely for the first time in years. Emma's home was filled with laughter and warmth, the kind of atmosphere he had thought was lost to him forever. Tommy accepted his presence naturally, including him in games and conversations without self-consciousness or pity. When Tommy went to his room for his afternoon quiet time, Emma and James found themselves alone on the couch. The apartment was peaceful, filled with the soft sounds of the city outside and Tommy's quiet play down the hall. "He likes you," Emma said softly, curling up beside James. "He's amazing," James replied honestly. "You've done an incredible job with him." Emma's expression grew serious. "It hasn't been easy." After Richard left, Tommy went through a really difficult period. He blamed himself, thought he had done something wrong. It took months of counseling and a lot of love to help him understand that sometimes adults make selfish choices that have nothing to do with their children. James reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Richard was a fool," maybe Emma said, "but his leaving led me to where I am now. To this moment with you." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and listening to the sounds of home around them. James felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging that he had thought was permanently beyond his reach. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, her expression open and attentive. "Before the accident, I thought I knew what I wanted from life. Success, recognition, the perfect relationship that looked good from the outside. But I was so focused on building my career that I never really built anything meaningful with another person." He paused, gathering courage. "These past few weeks with you and Tommy, I feel like I'm learning what really matters." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "James, I'm falling in love with you," he continued, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "With both of you, and I know that's complicated, that we come with our own challenges. But I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I was so scared to let myself care about you," she admitted. "Not because of the wheelchair, but because I've been hurt before. Tommy and I, we've built this safe little world for ourselves, and letting someone in felt like such a risk. And now?" James asked, hardly daring to breathe. Emma smiled through her tears. "Now I think the biggest risk would be letting you go. I love you too, James. We both do." The kiss that followed was soft and tender, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, James felt like he could conquer the world. "So what happens now?" Emma asked. "Now, we figure it out together," James replied. "All three of us." Over the following months, James became a regular fixture in Emma and Tommy's life. He taught Tommy the basics of architectural drawing, taking the boy to his office on weekends to show him real projects and explain the principles of good design. Emma often joined these sessions, bringing lunch and adding her own perspective on creating spaces that felt welcoming and inclusive. James's work began to change as well. Inspired by his relationship with Emma and Tommy, he started focusing more on universal design principles, creating buildings that were not just accessible but truly inclusive. His new projects gained attention for their innovative approach, too, combining beauty with functionality for people of all abilities. Emma's event planning business was also flourishing. With James's encouragement and business connections, she had been able to leave Sterling Events and start her own company, focusing on creating elegant, accessible events that welcomed everyone. Their professional collaboration strengthened their personal bond, as they discovered they shared not just love, but a vision for making the world more inclusive. One evening in late spring, as they sat in James's redesigned garden watching Tommy play with the neighbors' children, Emma noticed James seemed particularly quiet. "What's on your mind?" she asked, settling beside him on the bench he had installed next to his outdoor workspace. James was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy's laughter carry across the yard. "I've been thinking about the future," he said finally. "About what I want to build next?" "Another project?" Emma asked. "Something like that." James turned to face her, his expression serious but hopeful. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, his hands trembling slightly. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "I want to build a life with you, Emma. A real family. A home where love matters more than anything else." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Through tears of joy, Emma whispered, "Yes, yes, of course." Tommy, who had been watching from across the yard, came running over. "Are you getting married?" he asked excitedly. "We are," Emma laughed, showing him the ring. "Does that mean James will be my dad?" Tommy asked, looking between them with hopeful eyes. James felt his heart overflow as he looked at this boy who had taught him so much about acceptance and love. "If you want me to be buddy?" Tommy threw his arms around both of them, and James knew that his life had been forever changed by one simple question. "Can I be your date tonight?" That night, at the charity gala, Emma had seen past his wheelchair to the man underneath. She had refused to let him disappear into the shadows, and in doing so, she had saved not just him, but both of them. As they sat together in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the sounds of family and home, James realized that love had found him after all. Not despite his challenges, but because of his willingness to be vulnerable enough to accept it. Emma had taught him that strength came not from standing on your own, but from having the courage to let others stand with you. Their wedding 6 months later was held in the ballroom where they had first danced, with Tommy serving as ring bearer and the space redesigned to accommodate guests of all abilities. As James waited at the altar in his wheelchair, watching Emma walk toward him with radiant joy, he understood that sometimes the most beautiful architecture wasn't made of steel and stone, but of love, acceptance, and the courage to build something new from the pieces of what came before. Emma had asked to be his date for one night, but she had ended up being his partner for life. And together, they were building something more beautiful than James had ever imagined possible. A family founded on love without conditions, strength without pretense, and the understanding that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and included in life's greatest celebrations. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments side. Love to hear from you.